Andy Crouch relates a story that he shared in his book, A Tech-Wise Family. Now, Andy is the former executive editor for Christianity Today, and he's also written several books. This one in particular was caught my attention with this one particular story. So take a listen. A few years ago, I had the great gift of being invited into the bedroom. By the time it was discovered, had erupted. After a glorious and grace-filled year of life, he lay on his bed. His body was now unbearably thin and weak. David was an internationally celebrated photographer, but he would never make another image. He had sent me countless text messages over the years, but now he was beyond text messaging. He had created a Facebook group where he and his wife, Angie, chronicled of its treatment and all the ups and downs that followed, but he would never again update it. But he was still there, still with us, still able just barely to hear us praying and singing, able around his bed and know that he was not alone. His brother brought a guitar and we sang several nights in a row. Matt Redman. Great song, by the way. The technology was over. The easy everywhere dream had ended. Now we could only be here in our own vulnerable bodies, present to the immensely hard reality and husband dying. Over the bed was a framed, calligraphed rendering of David and Angie's wedding vows. It was one of the hardest places I've ever been. Holy places I've ever been. It was one of the best places I've ever been. We are meant to be more lasting than anything our technological world can invent. We are meant to die in each other's arms, surrounded by prayer and song, knowing beyond knowing, meant for so much more than technology could ever give us. Above all, for the wisdom and courage that it will never give us. We are meant to spur one another along on the way to a better life. The life that is really life. A familiar passage from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4. Two are better than one, because they have good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is keep warm alone. I appreciate the way that Solomon wrote these verses. Here's what I mean. He directly speaks to the wisdom of relationships. For example, two are better than one. And he says this in a host of areas that we just mentioned. Companionship, warmth, survival. Let's put it this way. I'm going to ask you to do something here. In your message, in your bulletin that you got, I couldn't remember the name of it. In the bulletin that you got, there's a message outline in there. Pull that out and get ready to write this down, okay? We were created for relationships. We were created for relationships. I've heard it said in a more alliterative way, like we were created for community. That sounds a little too, I don't know, cutesy. But it essentially means the same thing. We weren't meant to live our lives apart from other people. We are meant to live our lives in relationship with other human beings. Once again, in verse 9, two are better than one because they have good reward for their toil. That's how God designed us. And here's the thing. How we go about living that out matters. Check out this verse from Psalms, where God kind of ups the ante a little bit compared to what Solomon did. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell. When brothers dwell in unity. It sounds great, but it's not easy. So how do we go about doing this? Well, Mark, I'm glad you asked. Mark's my buddy. I can do that. We're continuing our series today in Proverbs with a message titled Wisdom in Relationships. And we're going to consider 4 Proverbs today and get some insight on how to not just simply choose and navigate our way through relationships, but to flourish in them. And we'll do this by employing wisdom when seeking relationships. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at 3 different relationships from the Old Testament. And we're going to consider 4 things to remember when employing wisdom with respect to relationships. So here we go. Let's get started. Write this down, number 1. Don't write number 1 down. I should have put, you know what I mean. Write this down. We must be wise in how we choose. We must be wise in how we choose. Excuse me. Folks online, have a drink of coffee right now. Wisdom in relationship begins here. Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools suffers harm. What do you think that means? Well, I think it at least implies that who we associate with has an effect on our character. Now, we've probably all been in relationships with people who have brought the very best out in us. And then other relationships, well, maybe not so much. Such was the case with a guy named Rehoboam. Early in his reign, he had some important decisions that he had to make. You see, Solomon, his father, had recently died, and Rehoboam had just become king. Now, we all know who Solomon is, considered to be the wisest man who ever lived. But just to show his humanity and how that he was a human being and that he was flawed and messed up just like the rest of us, towards the end of his life, he had 700 wives and princesses. I couldn't imagine. And 300 concubines. Here's the thing, is Solomon was warned, no doubt by the prophets, but by God himself, that look, you cannot be marrying and intermarrying and with people outside of your faith. Because what's going to happen is they're going to steer your heart away from the Lord. And it doesn't say this in the Bible, but I'm going to take a little preacher's license here and say that my guess is Solomon's like, yeah, whatever. I'm the wisest guy that's ever lived. Man, I'm not going to mess this up, right? Well, don't you know he did. Eventually they started, and eventually he basically walked away from the Lord. You're the wisest man alive, the wisest man who ever lived. We still call him that, for heaven's sakes. Walks away from the Lord. So as you might imagine, there's some chaos going on in his kingdom. And then he dies. And Rehoboam, his son, becomes king. So Rehoboam sees the chaos that's going on, and he sees what's going on. And he's like, man, I gotta get up with some people here and try to figure this thing out. So what he does is he goes to Solomon's advisors. And they're older guys. They're older guys. So they go to Solomon, Rehoboam goes to these guys, and he asks them advice. What should I do? Where do I go from here? And the old dude's advice were, here's what you need to do. Solomon kind of lost it a little bit towards the end. You need to lighten it up a little bit. Lighten the load that you're asking of your people. And if you do that, your people will follow you forever. And Solomon took that, or Rehoboam took that and thought about it and said, okay. So he goes and finds some young guys. And it happens to be that these were the young guys that he was hanging out with. Okay? These were his contemporaries. So he goes to them and says, okay, what do I do? And he said, don't listen to the old men. What do they know? I think what you need to do, we think what you need to do is you need to make it even harder. You need to put even more of a burden on them. And if they don't obey you, man, you need to make their punishment even worse. So Rehoboam thinks about it and says, okay, here's what we're going to do. 3 days from now, let me pray about this, think about this, stew in it a little bit, and we'll get back together and I'll let you know what we're going to do. Well, at the end of 3 days, they get together, and I'll just let the cat out of the bag here. Rehoboam chose poorly. Check out 1 Kings. This is chapter 12. But he abandoned the counsel of the old men, let me start that again. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men had gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. He chose the way that his young friends, who, by the way, had no experience in leading or ruling. And he shunned the advice of the elders who had advised his father Solomon and were pretty well versed in the ways of leadership. And here's what happens. Take a listen to this. It's not going to be on the screen. I just have this here. I just want you to take a listen and read this. This is what Rehoboam said. And the king answered the people harshly. And forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. What a guy, huh? My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people. Not long after this, 11 of Israel's 12 tribes rebelled and literally walked away, thereby dividing the kingdom and the nation in two. Israel and 11 tribes to the north, Judah in the south. And the only reason Judah didn't walk was because the promise the Lord gave David, and that was that he will have a king on the throne in Jerusalem. Otherwise, my guess is they would have all walked away at that point. My friends, Rehoboam took foolish advice from fools, and it cost him dearly. However, not just him, but all of the people of both kingdoms. It would be one thing, and we can all relate to this. It would be one thing if the consequences were felt of our actions, of our decisions. It would be one thing if the consequences were felt only by the king and his foolish advisors, but countless lives were affected by Rehoboam's folly. All right, here's something I like to do anytime I have the opportunity to speak with you. Congregational survey. Ready for this? By show of hands. Anybody ever taken bad advice, well-intentioned though it may be, and run with it? Thank you. You guys were way more honest than the ones at the 9 o'clock service. So I salute you. More often than not, here's the sad part, more often than not, the advice giver, the person who said, yeah, you need to do this, are nowhere to be found when it comes time to pay the piper. And you and perhaps others are left to deal with it. That, my friend, that's why it's important to seek relationships and all that goes with it wisely. All right? Number 2, write this down. When it comes to relationships, we must consider love as one of wisdom's highest values. Take a listen to Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity. Now, there's a couple different ways you can translate that. The way I'm going to translate it is that a friend loves at all times. Okay? That's what friends are for, right? And a brother is born for adversity. Now, it could be a blood brother. It could be someone who you've known all your life and would consider them either a brother or someone who's even closer than a brother. I'm going to go with the latter as opposed to the former. So, David Atkinson is a bishop in the Anglican Church in the United Kingdom. In his commentary on the Proverbs, he says there are foundational values when it comes to wisdom. The first of which is one that we've discussed over the course of this series, and that is, of course, the fear of the Lord. Both Pastor Timothy and Pastor Lonnie talked about those. Now, I'm going to give a little bit different definition, but it's going to suit us this morning. It's not a lot different, but a little bit. Fear of the Lord can be defined as reverent obedience to the Lord, to Yahweh. We can define our love in more than a couple of different ways, but for the sake of today's discussion, we'll define love as an appropriate respect and reverence for God and all that He has made. Okay? Love is all over the place in the Proverbs, and in particular when it comes to relationship. And it shows us what it means. The greatest way to imitate God is to love. Love God, love people. Here's what that means. Familiar passage from the New Testament. The Great Commandment is presented by Jesus of Nazareth. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is a great and first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. There's another one, and I'll call it a second one, and that is to love others as God does. The new commandment, once again, from Jesus, John 13, from the Upper Room Discourse. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, listen closely, by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Check this out. The love that we have for each other is how we are defined as a disciple of Jesus. Not what we do, not even what we know, but how we love. And we can see what this looks like in the story from the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel. It's the story of David the king and Jonathan the son of Saul, who was also king at the time. So let's set this up. Let's talk about this for a minute. We all know the story of David. David, little kid, youngest brother in the family of Jesse, has a bunch of older brothers. But there's something about David. He's a shepherd, and he's very brave, and I mean all of the great things. And they go out of the way. The writer in Samuel goes to say he was ruddy and good looking. Okay? Just thought I'd let you know that. So David was a young guy, and all of a sudden there's this huge battle that's about to take place with Philistines. And what happened was, now, great big guy, giant, just big guy, and starts taunting the army of Israel. And they're sitting there basically trembling in their shoes. And David's looking around. I'm going to just take a stab here and say he's 12 years old. David's 12 years old. He's looking around. And he says, who's this guy think he is? Who is he to defy the armies of the living God? And still no champion stood from Israel. So David says, all right, I'll go. and all he has is a sling and stones and a shepherd bag. And they try to, dress him up with armor and swords and everything else, and they're all too heavy for him. It's like, no, I'll just take this. So he goes and he stands before Goliath. Goliath laughs him to scorn. And we all know the story. David taunts him right back. Said, you come with all this might and swords and everything else, but I come to you in the name of the living God. And this day, I will take your life and I will remove your head from your corpse so that you will know that there is a God in Israel. Great story. Well, while this whole thing's going on, Saul's in the back, and Saul has a son named Jonathan. So Jonathan's back there with him. So David, we all know the story, hits the stone, takes Goliath out, goes up, cuts his head off, holds it up. The people of Israel, the army of Israel, overruns the Philistine. Great story at the end. They come back at the end. They're getting everything together towards the when everything's all said and done. And Saul walks up and says, "Who are you?" And he tells him, "I'm David, son of Jesse, your servant." And Jonathan, his son, was right there with him. And they have this conversation. But then 1 Samuel 18 tells us this. As soon as David, finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. He stayed with Saul and the family the whole time. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. What a great story, huh? Unfortunately, this newfound friendship would be tested sorely. Because what happened was that Saul had disobeyed God. David was anointed king, and Saul got wind of this. He knew it. And the Bible tells us that the Lord sent a snake over the kingdom. Nothing was further from the truth, by the way. Jonathan's soul was knit to the soul of David. And every time Saul would devise a plan, Jonathan would let David know what was going on and David would be able to escape. When Saul would confront, "You can't do this," and be king. This happened throughout a certain period of time. But you know what? Jonathan remained in his own life. God had placed him. He never forgot. A little later in 2 Samuel 9, David repaid his friend and promised him a place. If a person is indeed fortunate, they may be blessed with a faithful, loving friendship like the one between David and Jonathan. Both men practiced what Jesus called greater love. And you know what? We're talking about it today, some 3,000 years later. There's great wisdom in love because it seeks to revere and imitate God and all that he is by practicing the very essence of who he is, which is great love. Now let's consider what might be the polar opposite. Number 3, write this down. We must understand, and this is within relationships, we must understand that there will be friction. And that's okay. Let me share a personal story with you. I grew up in the western suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we lived in a subdivision that was full of post-World War II homes, ranch houses, everything else. And it wasn't a big neighborhood, but within our block were 3 Kevin Michaels. 3. There was Kevin Michael Doyle. There was Kevin Michael Jasensky. And there was Kevin Michael O'Connor. That would be me, for those of you who are wondering. We all got to be really good friends. But Kevin Doyle moved away when he was about 8 or 9 years old. And Kevin Kevin Jasensky and I got to be really, really good friends. And we got to be really great friends, best friends, when we were in junior high and we played Pee Wee football together. He was on a different team, I was on a different team. We hung out together, we did stuff together, we were inseparable. But here's the thing, it was a very competitive relationship. People would look at us and say, do these guys hate each other? It's like, no, we're best friends, man. But we would just super competitive with one another. And I'll let you in on a little secret. Kevin was a better athlete than me. Kevin J was better than me, except at one thing, and that was diving. So, one time, we'd gone all the way sophomores in high school. The coach of the swim team saw me dive and said, I want you to try out for the diving teams. I was beside myself with, wow, you know. And I told Kevin J, my buddy, and he just looked at me and he said, well, I'm trying out for the diving team too. And I just looked at him and I said, dude, you've never gone off a diving board in your life? If you did, all you ever did was a can opener or a cannonball. Give me a break. He said, doesn't matter. I'm going to do it. So we pushed each other during the competition. We both got good. And I was always better than him, but if he'd had one more year, he'd have passed me. He was that good of an athlete. But one time it happened that we were practicing, and trampolines are typically used for practicing diving just to learn techniques and how to do certain things without killing yourself on the water or hitting the board or anything. So we were on a trampoline, and I said something to him, and he said something to me, and I just walked across the trampoline, and man, I just took a swing at him. Kevin's bigger than me, by the way. Thought I'd let you know that. Takes a swing. I take a swing at him, and he jerks back, and he just looks at me. And then he leans in. I don't remember him hitting me, but he did. And I was picking myself up from across the trampoline. And here's the thing. The thing I thought about more than anything else wasn't the vengeance that I was going to try to wreak on this guy. It was the fact that I hope by the stupid thing and impetuous thing I just did by clocking my buddy, that it doesn't hurt our relationship. That was the first thing that came to my mind. And that's, later on, I kind of look back and say, yeah, that was when I knew this guy was my bestie. So, life goes on. He joins the Navy after school. And a couple of years later, he's best man in mine and Carol's wedding. And then we lose touch. So, about 2 months ago, Carol, my wife, gets an email at the church, and it says, hey, is the Kevin O'Connor that is, at your church, is he the Kevin O'Connor who grew up in Pittsburgh, in our neighborhood? And my wife's eyes just got big. She told me this. Her eyes got big as saucers. She said, my gosh, this is Kevin J. And she shoots a note back to him. Absolutely, this is him. Got his number. I reach out, text him. We finally connect on phone. Now, mind you, I haven't spoken to him 25, 30 years, right? We get on the phone and have a conversation. And friends, I'm telling you that it was like we had just seen each other the night before. However, having said that, harken back to the trampoline incident. Wise relationships are still human relationships. So it shouldn't surprise us that oftentimes in our broken humanity, well, it can kind of get in the way. Even the very best of relationships have some friction in them. Someone says or does something they perhaps shouldn't have, or maybe doesn't do something or say something they should have. And all the husbands said, amen. It happens. And it's not a matter of if, but when. A familiar proverb puts it this way. Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Friction isn't always a bad thing. It can sharpen, smooth, and straighten inanimate objects like knives. And a great example of another one involving King David. And this time the other party is the prophet Nathan. So let's talk about this for just a minute. Nathan and David, go back, start in like chapter 8 in 2 Samuel, because I don't have the time to really get into this. But take a look at it and read it. And what you see is Nathan and David grew to be very close friends, even prophet king. When God had something to say to David, he went to prophet Nathan and would tell David. And he told David, gave him the Davidic covenant, which basically said that he would never lack a man on the throne, and that the Messiah would come from his family. But then we all know the story of David and Bathsheba, right? David, in an inopportune moment, commits adultery with one of his soldiers' wives, and then makes a plot to kill the soldier. And he does. Okay, so David thinks he's getting away with it so far. So Nathan comes strolling into the palace one day and said, David, I have a story for you. And he tells the story of a rich guy and a poor guy. And the poor guy had one little sheep. He was a little ewe lamb, and it was almost like a pet to this guy. Slept with him, followed him around the house, the whole shooting match, like a dog. Then the rich guy had more than he could possibly do. So the rich guy says, has someone come by and visit him, and he's going to make him dinner. But he doesn't want to make dinner from one of his own sheep, so he goes and takes the poor guy's lamb, for heaven's sakes. David is furious. This guy deserves to die. Just goes off. And my guess is there was a pregnant pause between the time David went off and between the time Nathan said this. Nathan said to David, you are the man. You're the rich guy. And he goes and tells him, yes, you're going to live, all this stuff, but your son's going to die. And there's going to be strife in your house forever till the day you die. And we all know it played out that way. But we also know this. I happen to think, and I've shared this before, I happen to think that Nathan was David's best friend. You know why? Because he wasn't afraid to tell him the bad news. He wasn't afraid to look his friend in the eye and tell him the truth. He wasn't afraid to look his friend in the eye and say, you screwed this up. That's I pray that each and every one of you have a Nathan in your life. I do. In every real relationship there will be friction, and I believe that's by design. God's desire is that each and every one of us become a mirror image of Jesus of Nazareth. And he also understands that if left to our own devices, it would never happen. So God places people in positions to more or less act as a sharpening agent to a brother or sister. He uses us to help others become what he created them to become, and along the way, he teaches us a lot about ourselves. Friction within relationships can be difficult and painful no matter which side you are on. I'm reminded of John 15:13, where Jesus teaches us that there is no greater love than to lay down your life for another. And it doesn't always mean dying for someone. I happen to think, especially today, most often it means living for someone, putting your own needs aside and caring for the other. Relationships can be hard because we're all fallen, and we all bring that to the table. But if we persevere, we can play a part, by God's grace, in helping a faithful companion fulfill their redemptive potential. One last thing before we close. Write this down. Strive for quality, not necessarily quantity, when choosing relationships. Let me just give you this passage from Proverbs 18. A man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Friends, I've known a bunch of people in my lifetime. Some, even many, I've called friends. But I can count on one hand those whom I would call brother. Relationships can be difficult. I've said that a lot. Relationships can be difficult, painful, and frustrating, but worth every bit of it for the opportunity to call someone brother or sister. So let's land this plane. Or as my good buddies Mark and Jackie would say, let's bag those fries. You've been waiting for that one, man. Okay, the big idea, also known as a sermon in a sentence. Listen closely. The company you choose to keep will determine the trajectory of your character. Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. I'll close with this. Who you spend time with matters. So choose wisely. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your presence in this place today. We thank you for the people in our lives, the ones that we call friends, the ones that we call brother and sister, both blood and otherwise. Without them, life would not be anywhere near as rich. Yeah, it's frustrating sometimes, but way better with than without them. Lord, my deepest prayer at this moment is that each and every person in this place will have the opportunity to have the kind of relationship with at least one person in their lifetime whom they can call brother or sister. It makes all the difference in the world when things are really hard. And Lord, maybe there's some people that came in today. They either came as visitors or they came to, maybe they came with a friend. Have no idea why they bothered coming to church. But here they are. And Lord, I pray that what they heard was something that will be helpful to them as they move forward. And there may be some people that in this place today that, they've been coming to church and been checking it out, but they're just really not sure about this Jesus thing. But today something clicked. Today something happened. And if that's you, I want to invite you to make Jesus the Lord of your life. It's not a hard thing to do. You can do it with a prayer. Just reach out to him. I mean, there's no magic in the prayer, but all you got to say is this, and you can say it along with me if you'd like. Lord Jesus, something hit me today with what Pastor Kevin said. And I would really like to give my life to you. And I would like to invite you into my life to make all the changes you need to make. Life's been hard, but it's had some good times. But I'm looking for more. And from what he said, you're the one that can bring it. So Lord, I give my life to you. Today, forever, and completely. If you prayed that prayer, you need to tell somebody. Come tell me. Write it down on the card that's in front of your seat, the communication card. Tell Amy. She'd love to hear it. Just tell somebody, because we'd love the opportunity to pray with you and have the opportunity to help you become who God created you to become. So Lord, thanks. Thanks for being here with us today. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we're going to do a time of reflection right now. Our band's going to play a song, but I just want to let you know a couple different things. If you prayed that prayer, or if you need prayer, we've got stations throughout the church. Any place where you see one of these teal signs, teal crosses, there's someone under there that'd love to pray with you. They'd love the opportunity to do that. We've also got communion elements there. If you want to partake of the Lord's Supper, you can do that right in your seat. In a private moment if you'd like. But we would just welcome you to to just sit back and allow the Lord to speak to you during this time. Thank you.